The winter wind cut through Belinda Harper's thin wool coat like 1,000 frozen knives as she watched the last wagon of the convoy disappear into the gray dawn, leaving nothing behind but wheel tracks in the fresh snow and the dying embers of the campfire that had kept her warm through the night. She had woken just minutes too late, her fever-racked body having finally succumbed to exhaustion in those precious hours before sunrise. The illness that had plagued her for the past 3 days must have dulled her senses, made her sleep through the sounds of harnesses being fastened and horses being readied. Now she stood alone in the vast emptiness of the Arizona high country, 20 miles north of Flagstaff, where the winter of 1883 had proven unusually harsh and unforgiving. Belinda's legs trembled as she stumbled toward the abandoned campsite, her breath coming out in white clouds that dissipated quickly in the bitter air. The convoy had been traveling from Santa Fe to California, a mixed group of families and fortune seekers hoping to start fresh on the West Coast. She had joined them in Santa Fe after her aunt passed away, leaving her with nothing but a small trunk of belongings and enough money to pay for passage west. The fever had started somewhere past Albuquerque, growing worse with each passing day until last night when the medicine woman in the group had given her a tonic that finally let her sleep. But sleep had cost her everything. She knelt by the fire pit, holding her bare hands over the faint warmth still radiating from the ashes. Her gloves were somewhere in her trunk, which was undoubtedly packed tight in one of the wagons now miles away. The realization of her situation settled over her like a shroud. No food beyond the half-piece of hardtack in her coat pocket, no water except what she could melt from snow, no weapon, no horse, and the temperature was dropping as clouds gathered overhead, promising more snow before nightfall. Belinda was 22 years old, and she was going to die alone in the Arizona wilderness. She forced herself to stand, to think clearly despite the lingering fog of fever in her head. The convoy would be heading west toward Williams, following the old trail that ran parallel to the railroad tracks being laid through the territory. If she started walking now, perhaps she could catch up before nightfall. It was a desperate hope, but it was all she had. She took 3 steps before her knees buckled. The fever might have broken, but it had left her weak as a newborn calf. Belinda caught herself on a frost-covered boulder, gasping as the cold bit into her palms. Tears stung her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She had survived too much already to give up now. Her parents had died of cholera when she was 15. She had worked as a seamstress for 7 years, saving every penny while living with her aunt. She had endured the grief of losing the only family she had left. She would not let the winter take her without a fight. The sound of hoofbeats made her head snap up so fast her vision swam. For a moment, she thought the fever had returned, bringing hallucinations with it, but then she saw him. A lone rider coming from the east, moving at a steady pace through the snow-dusted sage and juniper. His horse was a magnificent paint, white and brown patches standing out against the monochrome landscape. The man sat tall in the saddle, his broad-brimmed hat pulled low against the wind, a long duster coat hanging nearly to his stirrups. Belinda tried to call out, but her voice emerged as little more than a croak. She waved her arms instead, stumbling forward, terrified that he might pass by without seeing her. The rider's head turned in her direction, and she saw him rein in his horse, sitting motionless for a long moment as if assessing the situation. Then he turned the paint toward her and urged it into a trot. As he drew closer, Belinda could make out more details. He was young, perhaps in his late 20s, with dark hair that curled slightly at the nape of his neck where it touched his collar. His face was weathered by sun and wind, with strong features that spoke of both determination and kindness. He had the lean, muscular build of a man who spent his days in the saddle, and he moved with the easy grace of someone completely at home in the wilderness. He pulled up a few feet away from her, his dark eyes taking in her disheveled appearance, the abandoned campsite, the empty landscape stretching in all directions. When he spoke, his voice was deep and steady, with a slight drawl that marked him as someone who had spent time in Texas or Oklahoma. "You need help, miss." It was not a question. Belinda wrapped her arms around herself, trying to stop the shivering that had taken hold of her body. "The convoy. They left. I was sick and I overslept, and now they are gone." He dismounted in one smooth motion, his boots crunching in the thin layer of snow. Up close, he was even taller than she had realized, well over 6 feet, and despite her fear and exhaustion, she felt a flutter of something in her chest that had nothing to do with fever. He pulled off his thick leather gloves and reached out to touch the back of his hand to her forehead, the gesture so natural and gentle that she did not even think to pull away. "Fever's broke, but you are still burning up some," he said. "How long since you ate?" "Yesterday morning." "Maybe." "I do not remember clearly." He nodded once, then turned back to his horse. From his saddlebag he pulled out a canteen and a bundle wrapped in cloth. He handed her the canteen first, watching as she drank deeply of the cold water. Then he unwrapped the cloth to reveal several pieces of dried beef and some biscuits that looked only a day or two old. "Eat slow," he instructed. "Your stomach will rebel if you rush it." Belinda took a piece of the dried beef, her hands shaking so badly she nearly dropped it. The first bite was heaven, salty and rich and substantial. She forced herself to chew slowly, to follow his advice, even though every instinct screamed at her to devour everything in sight. "I am Belinda Harper," she managed between bites. "From Santa Fe originally, but before that St. Louis. I was traveling to California with a convoy. They were supposed to wait for me." "Hayden Quinn," he replied, settling his hat more firmly on his head as the wind picked up. "I run cattle for the Rocking Q Ranch about 30 miles south of here. Was tracking a group of strays when I saw the convoy pass through about 2 hours back. Seemed like they were moving awful fast, like maybe they were trying to outrun the weather." Belinda felt a surge of anger cut through her exhaustion. They did not even check if everyone was accounted for. There were 43 people in that convoy. "Did no one notice I was missing?" Hayden's expression darkened slightly. "People can be selfish when they are scared. That storm coming in from the north is going to be a bad one. Likely they wanted to make Williams before it hit, and checking on every soul would have cost them time. So they just left me to die." "Some folks got no honor," he agreed quietly. "But you are not dead yet, Miss Harper, and I do not intend to let that change." He glanced up at the sky, where the clouds were growing thicker and darker by the minute. "We got maybe 3 hours before that storm hits, not enough time to make it to Williams or back to Flagstaff. But there is an old line shack about 5 miles west of here, belongs to the ranch I work for. It will have a stove, some supplies, enough to wait out the weather. Can you ride?" "I have never been on a horse in my life," Belinda admitted, hating how weak and useless she felt. "I grew up in the city." Hayden's lips quirked in what might have been the beginning of a smile. "Well, you are about to learn. Come on." He walked to the campsite and kicked snow over the remaining embers, ensuring no spark could escape and start a wildfire once the storm passed. Then he moved around the area quickly, his eyes scanning the ground for anything useful. He found a tattered blanket that had blown against a bush, shook it out, and folded it over his arm. That was all the convoy had left behind besides tracks and ashes. When he returned to Belinda, she had finished the dried beef and was working on a biscuit. Color had started to return to her cheeks, and her hands had steadied somewhat. Hayden studied her for a moment, then nodded as if satisfied with what he saw. "My horse is called Dakota," he said, running a hand along the paint's neck. "He is strong enough to carry both of us and gentle enough that you do not need to worry. I will sit behind you so you do not fall off. All you need to do is hold onto the saddle horn and trust me. Can you do that?" Belinda looked into his eyes, those dark, steady eyes that held no judgment or cruelty, only a calm certainty that everything would be all right. She had known this man for perhaps 15 minutes, but something in her core recognized that he was offering more than just rescue. He was offering safety, protection, a chance at survival in a world that had proven harsh and unforgiving. "Yes," she said, "I can do that." Hayden helped her over to Dakota, his hands steady and respectful as he placed them on her waist. "On 3, I am going to lift you up. Swing your right leg over and settle into the saddle. Do not worry about being graceful, just get yourself seated." He counted, and on 3 he lifted her as if she weighed nothing at all. Belinda gasped as she found herself suddenly high off the ground, but her hands instinctively grabbed the saddle horn as he had instructed. She managed to get her leg over, settling somewhat awkwardly into the worn leather saddle. Dakota shifted beneath her but did not move otherwise, as patient and steady as his owner. Hayden handed her the reins, though he told her she would not need to use them. Then he placed his boot in the stirrup and swung up behind her in one fluid motion. Suddenly, he was pressed against her back, his arms coming around either side of her to take the reins from her nervous grip. She could feel the solid warmth of his chest, smell the leather and sage and something else that was just him. "Lean back against me," he said close to her ear, his breath warm against her cold skin. "It will be more comfortable for both of us, and you will not fall." Belinda hesitated only a moment before letting herself relax into him. He was right. It was more comfortable, and the heat from his body immediately began to chase away some of the cold that had settled deep in her bones. Hayden made a soft clicking sound with his tongue, and Dakota started walking west at a steady pace that ate up the ground without jarring them too badly. They rode in silence for the first mile, Belinda concentrating on keeping her seat and adjusting to the rolling gait of the horse. The landscape around them was beautiful in a stark way, all muted colors and endless sky. The snow had stopped falling for now, but the wind continued to blow in fierce gusts that sent loose powder swirling across their path. In the distance, mountains rose up like jagged teeth, their peaks lost in the gathering clouds. "How did you come to be traveling alone?" Hayden asked eventually, his voice low and conversational. "Most unmarried women travel with family. I had an aunt in Santa Fe, my mother's sister. She took me in after my parents died 7 years ago, but she passed in November pneumonia. She left me a small inheritance, enough to pay for passage to California and to live on for a few months while I find work. I am a seamstress, a good one. I thought I could start fresh somewhere new, somewhere without so many memories." "I am sorry for your losses," Hayden said, and she could hear the genuine sympathy in his voice. "It is a hard thing to lose family. Did you lose yours?" "My mother when I was born. My father raised me and my 2 brothers on a ranch in eastern New Mexico. He died 3 years back. Heart gave out. My older brother took over the ranch and my younger brother went to work for the railroad. I drifted west looking for work and ended up at the Rocking Q. The owner, Silas Quinn, he is my uncle on my mother's side. He took me in, made me his foreman last year. So Quinn is your family name?" "That it is. My father was Cyrus Quinn, came out from Tennessee before the war. He was a hard man but fair, and he taught all of us boys to respect the land and treat people right." Belinda felt herself relaxing further, lulled by the rhythm of the horse's gait and the steady sound of Hayden's voice. It must have been wonderful growing up on a ranch, all that open space and freedom. It had its moments, Hayden agreed. But it was also hard work from dawn to dusk, dangerous too. Lost a good friend when we were 17, thrown from a horse and broke his neck. Another time my younger brother nearly died from a rattlesnake bite. The land gives, but it also takes. You have to respect that. Like it nearly took me this morning. Like that. But the thing about the West, Miss Harper, is that it also gives second chances to those who are strong enough to take them. You survived the fever. You survived being abandoned. You are going to survive this storm. And then you are going to get to California and build yourself a new life, just like you planned. His certainty warmed her more than his body heat could. You sound very sure of that. I am. You got steel in you, I can tell. The weak ones do not make it out here, but you will. They rode on as the wind picked up further and the first new flakes of snow began to fall. Hayden urged Dakota into a faster walk, not quite a trot, but covering ground more quickly. Belinda could feel the tension in his body, the way his eyes constantly scanned the horizon. He was worried about the storm, though he had not said as much. She found herself trusting his judgment, believing that he would get them to safety. Another mile passed, then another. The snow was falling more heavily now, the flakes thick and wet, sticking to their clothes and Dakota's mane. Visibility was decreasing rapidly, the landscape becoming a blur of white and gray. Belinda's earlier fever felt like a distant memory compared to the bone-deep cold that was settling into her body despite Hayden's warmth at her back. "There," Hayden said suddenly, pointing ahead. "See that dark shape near those cottonwoods? That is the line shack." Belinda squinted through the snow and could just make out a small structure, little more than a cabin really, nestled against a rise in the land with a stand of bare trees nearby. It looked rough and weathered, but to her eyes it might as well have been a palace. Shelter, warmth, a place to wait out the storm. Hayden guided Dakota right up to the cabin door before dismounting. He reached up and helped Belinda down, his hands strong and sure on her waist. Her legs nearly buckled when her feet hit the ground, and he caught her easily, holding her steady until she nodded to show she could stand on her own. "Get inside," he instructed. "There should be matches on the shelf by the door. Get a fire going in the stove if you can manage it. I need to settle Dakota in the lean-to around back and make sure he has feed and water." Belinda pushed open the cabin door, which was unlocked, and stepped into the dim interior. It was a single room, maybe 12 feet by 15, with a small potbelly stove in one corner, a narrow cot against one wall, a rough table with 2 chairs, and some shelves holding supplies. The air inside was freezing, but at least it was still, protected from the wind. She found the matches exactly where Hayden said they would be, along with some kindling and split wood stacked beside the stove. Her hands were so cold they felt like blocks of ice, but she managed to get the stove door open and arranged the kindling inside. It took 3 tries to get a match lit, and her hands shook so badly she nearly dropped it, but finally the kindling caught. She added a few larger pieces of wood, watching as the flames grew stronger and began to radiate heat. The door opened, and Hayden came in with his saddlebags and the blanket he had salvaged from the campsite. Snow had already accumulated on his hat and shoulders, and his face was red from the cold. He shut the door firmly behind him and dropped the bar into place, sealing them inside against the storm. "Dakota is settled," he said, moving to the stove to warm his hands. "He has enough hay and water to last a couple of days if need be, and the lean-to is solid. He will be fine. And us?" Belinda asked. Hayden looked around the cabin, assessing their resources. We will be fine too. There is flour and beans and coffee here, some dried meat, a few cans of peaches, plenty of wood. We can wait out the storm in comfort, relatively speaking. Only thing is, there is just the one cot." Belinda felt her cheeks flush, and not from the growing warmth of the fire. "I can sleep on the floor. You saved my life. It is the least I can do." "You will do no such thing," Hayden said firmly. "You are still recovering from fever and the floor is too cold. We will work something out." He moved to the shelves and began pulling down supplies, laying them out on the table. A tin of coffee, a bag of beans, some flour, salt, a can of peaches as promised, and several pieces of dried venison. From his saddlebags he added to their stores, pulling out more dried meat, some hardtack, and a small cloth bag that turned out to contain jerky. "First thing is to get some hot food in both of us," he said, filling a battered pot with snow from just outside the door. "Then we can rest and wait for the storm to pass. Likely it will blow itself out by tomorrow afternoon." Belinda watched as he set the pot on top of the stove to melt and boil, then added coffee grounds once the water was ready. The smell of brewing coffee filled the small space, rich and comforting. While the coffee boiled, he put together a simple meal of beans and dried meat, cooking them in a small cast iron skillet he found hanging on the wall. They ate sitting at the table, the simple food tasting like a feast to Belinda's starved body. The coffee was strong and hot, chasing away the last of the cold that had settled into her bones. Outside, the wind howled and snow pelted against the single window, but inside they were safe and warm and fed. "Thank you," Belinda said quietly. "Not just for the food, but for everything. You did not have to stop for me. You could have ridden past and no one would have blamed you." Hayden met her eyes across the table, his expression serious. "I would have blamed me. My father taught us that you always help someone in need, no exceptions. He said it was not just about being decent, it was about building the kind of world you wanted to live in. I want to live in a world where people do not abandon each other, so I try to be the kind of person who does not abandon folks. Your father sounds like he was a good man." He was. Hard as nails and stubborn as a mule, but good clear through. I miss him every day. Hayden took a long drink of his coffee, his eyes distant. "He would have liked you, I think. He always respected people who did not give up, even when things got difficult." "I came close to giving up this morning," Belinda admitted. "When I realized they had left me, that I was alone out there with no supplies and no way to survive, I felt despair like I have never known. If you had not come along when you did, I do not think I would have lasted until noon. But you did not give up. You were trying to figure out how to survive when I found you. That counts for something." They finished their meal in companionable silence, the tension that had been present earlier gradually easing. When Hayden stood to clear the dishes, Belinda rose to help him, but he waved her back to her chair. "You rest. I will handle this." "I am not an invalid," she protested. "The fever is gone and I feel much better now that I have eaten. Still, you need to conserve your strength. Humor me." There was something in his tone that made her sit back down, something protective and carrying that sent a warm flutter through her chest. She watched as he efficiently cleaned up their meal, heating water to wash the dishes, putting away the remaining supplies. He moved with a comfortable ease that spoke of a man used to taking care of himself, but there was nothing rough or careless about his movements. Everything he did was deliberate and considered. When he finished, Hayden pulled one of the chairs close to the stove and gestured for Belinda to sit. She did, and he brought over the salvaged blanket, wrapping it around her shoulders. Then he took the other chair and settled into it with a sigh, stretching his long legs out toward the fire. "Tell me about California," he said. "What are you going to do when you get there?" Belinda pulled the blanket tighter around herself, letting herself imagine a future beyond this cabin, beyond the storm. I hope to find work as a seamstress in San Francisco or Sacramento. I am skilled at fine embroidery and dressmaking. Before my aunt got sick, I was making enough money that I was saving toward opening my own shop someday. I still have that dream, even if it has to wait a bit longer now. It is a good dream, Hayden said. Building something of your own, being independent. Not enough women get that chance. Do you think it is wrong for a woman to want independence? Belinda asked, curious about his answer. She had known plenty of men who thought a woman's only ambition should be marriage and children. No, Hayden said without hesitation. I think people should get to choose their own path, whether they are men or women. My mother, from what my father told me, she was a teacher before she married him. He said she was one of the smartest people he ever knew, always reading and learning. He told us boys that if she had lived, she would have made sure we respected women as equals, not just as wives or mothers or sisters. I have tried to honor that. Belinda felt something shift in her chest, a warming that had nothing to do with the fire in the stove. This man who had rescued her from certain death was turning out to be unlike any man she had ever met. He was strong and capable, yes, but also thoughtful and kind, with a sense of honor that seemed as natural to him as breathing. "What about you?" she asked. "What do you want from life?" Hayden was quiet for a long moment, staring into the flames visible through the stove's grate. "I want land of my own someday. Not a huge spread like my brother has, just enough to run a good herd and make a decent living. I want to build a house that will last, the kind of place you can raise a family in. I want to wake up every morning knowing that what I built is mine, that I am beholden to no one but myself and those I choose to care about." "That is a good dream too," Belinda said softly. "Maybe someday," Hayden replied. "I have been saving money, putting away every dollar I can spare. Another few years and I should have enough to buy my own piece of land. There is territory opening up all over Arizona and New Mexico, good grazing land for anyone willing to work hard and stick it out." They talked for another hour, the conversation flowing easily between them. Hayden told her about life on the ranch, about the cattle drives and the long days in the saddle, about the characters who worked alongside him. Belinda told him about growing up in St. Louis, about learning to sew from her mother, about the books she loved to read, and the places she dreamed of seeing someday. As the afternoon wore on and the storm continued to rage outside, Belinda found herself increasingly aware of Hayden's presence, of the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled, of the deep timbre of his voice, of the easy strength in his movements. There was something about him that made her feel safe in a way she had not felt since her father was alive. But there was also something more, something that made her heart beat faster when he looked at her. When evening came, they ate another simple meal and finished the last of the coffee. The wind outside had reached a howling pitch, and snow was drifting against the walls of the cabin. Hayden checked the wood supply and deemed it sufficient, then barred the door once more and turned to face the elephant in the room. "About the sleeping arrangements," he said. "I will take the floor." "You take the cot." "Absolutely not," Belinda said. "You have been out in the cold all day, riding and working. You need proper rest. So do you. You were sick just yesterday." They stared at each other, both stubborn, neither willing to back down. Finally, Belinda took a deep breath and said what she had been thinking for the past hour. "The cot is narrow but wide enough for two people if they do not mind being close. We are both adults. We could share it, for warmth and practicality, and I trust you to be a gentleman." Hayden's eyes widened slightly. "Miss Harper, I do not think that would be proper." "Proper?" Belinda almost laughed. I am stranded in a lined shack during a blizzard with a man I met this morning. I think Proper went out the window about the same time my convoy left me to die. What I care about is surviving and being sensible. It is going to be bitterly cold tonight, cold enough that the fire might not be sufficient. Body heat could make the difference between a miserable night and a tolerable one. She could see him considering her words, weighing propriety against practicality. Finally, he nodded slowly. "All right, but only if you are truly comfortable with it. I give you my word that I will not take advantage or behave dishonorably." "I believe you," Belinda said, and she meant it completely. They prepared for sleep in an awkward dance of turned backs and careful politeness. Belinda removed her boots and her outer coat but kept everything else on. Hayden did the same, though he also removed his gun belt and hung it on a peg within easy reach. The cot creaked as Belinda lay down on it, pressing herself against the wall to make room. Hayden blew out the lantern, leaving only the faint glow from the stove, then carefully settled onto the cot beside her. It was indeed a tight fit. Hayden was a large man, and the cot had been built for one person of average size. He ended up on his side facing her, one arm tucked under his head as a pillow, the other resting carefully on his own waist. Belinda could feel the heat radiating from his body, could hear his breathing in the darkness. "Comfortable?" he asked quietly. "Yes," she whispered back. And surprisingly, she was. Despite the strangeness of the situation, despite the impropriety of sharing a bed with a man she barely knew, she felt safe and warm and content. Her last thought before sleep claimed her was that she had been right to trust him. Belinda woke in the darkness to the sound of the wind still howling outside. The fire in the stove had burned down to embers, and the temperature in the cabin had dropped significantly. She was shivering, her teeth chattering, and without thinking she pressed back against Hayden's warmth. He stirred behind her, and then his arm came around her waist, pulling her close against his chest. "Cold," she managed to say through her chattering teeth. "I know. Let me add wood to the fire." But he did not move immediately, and Belinda realized that he too was shivering. The temperature must have dropped dramatically. Hayden finally forced himself to get up, and she heard him moving around in the darkness, the clank of the stove door opening, the sound of wood being added. Soon the fire was blazing again, and blessed warmth began to fill the small space. When Hayden returned to the cot, Belinda did not hesitate. She turned to face him and pressed herself against his chest, seeking his warmth. His arms came around her without question, holding her close, sharing body heat. It was intimate but not sexual, a matter of survival more than anything else. "Better," he murmured against her hair. "Yes, thank you." They stayed like that for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms, listening to the storm rage outside. Gradually the shivering stopped as warmth returned to their bodies, but even when they were warm again, neither of them pulled away. It felt too right, too natural to be held like this. "Hayden," Belinda whispered, "I am glad it was you who found me." She felt him shift slightly, and then his hand came up to gently stroke her hair. "So am I," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "So am I." When Belinda woke again, pale light was filtering through the cabin's single window. The wind had finally died down to a low moan, and the frantic pelting of snow against the walls had stopped. She was still in Hayden's arms, her head tucked under his chin, one of his hands resting on her back. She could hear his steady heartbeat beneath her ear, feel the rise and fall of his chest as he breathed. She knew she should feel scandalized, should pull away and put proper distance between them. But she did not want to move. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt completely at peace. There was something about Hayden Quinn that called to her soul, that made her want to know everything about him, that made her heart beat faster and her breath catch in her throat. Hayden stirred, and she felt him tense as he realized how closely they were still holding each other. But he did not immediately pull away either. Instead, his hand moved gently on her back, a soothing gesture, and his voice when he spoke was soft. "Morning. Storm sounds like it has passed." "Yes," Belinda agreed. She made herself pull back enough to look up at him. In the pale morning light, she could see his face clearly, the strong jaw darkened by stubble, the dark eyes that watched her with an expression she could not quite name. "Thank you for keeping me warm." "Thank you for the same," he replied. Then, with what seemed like reluctance, he released her and sat up, swinging his legs off the cot. "I should check on Dakota and see how much snow we got." Belinda sat up as well, finger combing her hair and trying to make herself presentable. Hayden pulled on his boots and coat, then unbarred the door and pushed it open. A drift of snow had piled against it, but he cleared it easily and stepped outside. Cold air rushed in, making Belinda shiver and move closer to the stove. He returned a few minutes later, brushing snow from his shoulders. About 6 inches fell, maybe more in the drifts. The sky is clearing, though, and the temperature is already starting to rise. If we wait until mid-morning, the sun should melt enough of the snow to make travel easier. "So we can reach Williams today?" Hayden hesitated, then shook his head. "Williams is still a good 40 miles from here, too far to make in one day even in good conditions. But the ranch is only 30 miles south, and we could make that by nightfall if we leave by noon." "You would be welcome there. My Uncle Silas and his wife Clara would be happy to take you in, let you rest properly and recover your full strength. Then we could arrange to get you to Williams and back on track to California." Something in Belinda's chest clenched at the thought of continuing to California, of leaving Hayden behind. It made no sense. She had known this man for barely 24 hours, but the thought of saying goodbye to him felt wrong in a way she could not explain. "That is very kind of your uncle," she managed to say. "I would not want to impose." "You would not be imposing. Clara loves having visitors, and God knows that ranch house is big enough for a dozen people." "Besides," Hayden added, his eyes meeting hers, "I would feel better knowing you were properly cared for before you continued your journey." They made breakfast from the remaining supplies, and Belinda helped Hayden pack up everything they had used, leaving the cabin clean and ready for the next person who might need it. As the morning progressed, the sun did indeed break through the clouds, and the temperature rose enough that the snow began to melt in earnest. By noon, when Hayden declared it time to leave, large patches of brown earth were visible through the white. Hayden saddled Dakota and helped Belinda mount the same way as before, settling himself behind her. But this time, when his arms came around her to take the reins, when she leaned back against his chest, it felt different. There was an awareness between them now, an acknowledgement of something neither was quite ready to name but both could feel. They rode south through a landscape transformed by the storm. The snow had draped everything in white, softening the harsh edges of rocks and brush, making the world look clean and new. The sky was a brilliant blue, the sun warm on their faces, and despite the cold, Belinda found herself enjoying the ride. Hayden pointed out landmarks as they traveled, telling her the names of the mountains in the distance, identifying the tracks of animals in the snow, sharing stories about the land. His knowledge of the territory was vast, born of years spent riding these trails, and Belinda found herself fascinated by everything he had to say. They stopped once to water Dakota at a small creek, and to eat some of the dried meat from Hayden's saddlebag. As they stood by the water, watching the horse drink, Hayden turned to Belinda with an expression that was almost hesitant. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "This dream of yours going to California, opening a dress shop, Is that what you truly want, or is it just the only path you could see? Belinda considered the question carefully. A week ago I would have said it was exactly what I wanted, but now I am not so certain. Why do you ask? Hayden was quiet for a moment, watching the water flow over the rocks. No particular reason. Just wondering if maybe California was not the only place a skilled seamstress could build a life. Arizona territory is growing. Towns are springing up everywhere as the railroad pushes through. Places like Flagstaff and Prescott, they need all kinds of services, including dressmakers. And the land here, it gets under your skin if you let it. Wide open spaces, big sky, the kind of freedom you cannot find back east. Belinda's heart was beating faster. Are you suggesting I should stay in Arizona? Hayden looked at her then, really looked at her, his dark eyes intense. I am suggesting that you have options, that maybe you do not have to go all the way to California to find what you are looking for. That maybe what you are looking for could be closer than you think. The air between them seemed charged with possibility. Belinda wanted to ask him to clarify what he meant, to say plainly what she thought she heard beneath his words. But she was afraid too, afraid of misunderstanding, afraid of hoping for something that might not be real. I will think about it, she said softly. They remounted and continued south, but the conversation had shifted something between them. Hayden's arms seemed to hold her a bit closer. Belinda leaned into him more fully. And when they spoke, it was with a new easiness, the comfort of two people beginning to know each other in a deeper way. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, they crested a rise, and Belinda saw the rocking Q Ranch spread out below them. It was larger than she had expected, with a substantial ranch house, a big barn, several outbuildings and corrals that held dozens of cattle and horses. Smoke rose from the chimney of the main house, and she could see figures moving about, attending to evening chores. Home, Hayden said simply, and Belinda heard the satisfaction in his voice. They rode down to the ranch, and before they even reached the main house, the door opened and a woman came out. She was perhaps 50, with silver-streaked brown hair and a round, pleasant face that broke into a smile when she saw them. Hayden, thank the Lord, she called out. We were worried when that storm hit and you had not returned. Silas was about ready to send out a search party. She paused as they drew closer, her eyes widening as she took in Belinda sitting in front of Hayden. And who is this? Hayden dismounted and helped Belinda down, his hands lingering on her waist for just a moment longer than necessary. Aunt Clara, this is Miss Belinda Harper. I found her yesterday morning, abandoned by her convoy north of here. Miss Harper, this is my aunt, Clara Quinn. Clara's expression went from surprised to horrified to warmly welcoming in the space of seconds. She hurried forward and took Belinda's cold hands in her own warm ones. You poor dear. Abandoned in this weather. Come inside at once. You must be frozen and exhausted. Hayden, you did right bringing her here. Before Belinda could protest, she found herself swept into the ranch house, which was warm and spacious and smelled of baking bread. Clara sat her down in a chair by a large fireplace and immediately began fussing over her, bringing hot coffee and a thick quilt to wrap around her shoulders. An older man who could only be Silas Quinn came in from another room, tall and broad-shouldered with a weathered face and sharp blue eyes. Hayden quickly explained the situation to his uncle, and Silas nodded with approval. You did the right thing, boy. No question. Miss Harper, you are welcome here for as long as you need. We do not turn away folks in need, and anyone who has been through what you have deserves proper care and rest. Thank you, Mr. Quinn, Belinda said, overwhelmed by their kindness. I do not want to be a burden. Nonsense, Clara said firmly. You will stay here until you are fully recovered and we can arrange proper passage for you to continue your journey. I will not hear another word about it. Now, when did you last have a proper bath and a hot meal? The answer to that question was so long ago that Belinda could not even remember clearly. Clara took charge, heating water for a bath, finding clean clothes that would fit Belinda from her own wardrobe, preparing a substantial meal. Hayden took care of Dakota and his other evening chores, but Belinda was acutely aware of his absence, of how much she wanted to see him again. That night, after a glorious hot bath and the best meal she had eaten in months, Belinda was shown to a small guest room on the second floor of the house. It had a real bed with clean sheets and thick blankets, a washstand with a mirror, and a window that looked out over the ranch yard. Clara had insisted on lending her a nightgown and had promised to help wash and repair Belinda's traveling clothes in the morning. Belinda lay in the comfortable bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep despite her exhaustion. Her mind kept returning to Hayden, to the way it had felt to be held in his arms, to the intensity in his eyes when he suggested she stay in Arizona. She had known him for barely more than a day, but he had become important to her in a way she could not fully explain. She must have eventually fallen asleep, because the next thing she knew, morning light was streaming through the window, and she could hear the sounds of the ranch coming to life below. She dressed in the borrowed clothes Clara had provided, a simple but well-made day dress in dark blue, and made her way downstairs. Clara was in the kitchen, preparing breakfast with the help of a young woman who was introduced as Maria, the ranch cook. Silas was already gone, out with the men checking on the cattle. But Hayden was there, sitting at the large kitchen table with a cup of coffee, and when Belinda entered the room, his face lit up in a way that made her heart skip a beat. "Good morning," he said, standing as she entered. "Did you sleep well? Better than I have in months," Belinda admitted. "That bed is heavenly." "Better than a narrow cot-in-a-line shack," Hayden said with a slight smile, and Belinda felt herself blushing at the memory of how they had spent that night, wrapped in each other's arms. Breakfast was a cheerful meal, with Clara asking Belinda questions about her life and her plans, offering advice and sympathy in equal measure. Hayden mostly listened, but Belinda was aware of his eyes on her, watching her with an expression that made her pulse quicken. After breakfast, Clara enlisted Belinda's help with some mending, delighted to discover that her guest was indeed as skilled with a needle as she claimed. They spent the morning in the sitting room, working on various items while Clara told stories about the ranch and the territory. Hayden had left right after breakfast to help with the cattle, and Belinda found herself watching the window, hoping to catch a glimpse of him. The days developed a pattern. Belinda spent her mornings helping Clara with household tasks and mending work, proving herself useful rather than simply a guest. In the afternoons, when the work was done, Hayden would return from his duties and they would walk together around the ranch, talking and learning more about each other. She learned that he loved reading but rarely had time for it, that he had a scar on his left arm from a run-in with a barbed wire fence, that his favorite food was his aunt's apple pie, that he dreamed of traveling someday, of seeing the ocean and the big cities back east, but that he always knew he would return to the west, to the open spaces that he loved. He learned that she had a dry sense of humor that caught him off guard and made him laugh, that she had once wanted to be a teacher, but her family could not afford to send her to normal school, that she could recite poetry from memory and loved to read novels, the more dramatic and romantic the better, that she was stronger than she looked, with a core of steel that had kept her going through every hardship life had thrown at her. With each passing day, Belinda found it harder to imagine leaving, not just the ranch, which had become a haven of warmth and safety. But Hayden, the thought of saying goodbye to him, of never seeing him again, was becoming physically painful. 2 weeks after her arrival, on a clear February afternoon, Hayden asked if she would like to ride out with him to check on some cattle in the far pasture. Clara packed them a lunch, and they set out on horseback. Belinda on a gentle mare named Rosie that Clara assured her was perfect for a beginning rider. To Belinda's delight, she found that with Hayden's patient instruction, riding was not as difficult as she had feared. Rosie was indeed gentle and responsive, and soon Belinda was trotting alongside Hayden with something approaching confidence. They rode for about an hour, until they reached a high meadow with a view that stretched for miles in every direction. Mountains rose up in the distance, their peaks still capped with snow. The sky was that brilliant blue that seemed unique to Arizona, cloudless and vast. Hayden dismounted and helped Belinda down, then spread out a blanket in a spot sheltered from the wind. They ate the lunch Clara had packed, simple sandwiches and apples and cookies, but it tasted perfect in the clean air. When they finished eating, Hayden lay back on the blanket with his hands behind his head, staring up at the sky. Belinda sat beside him, hugging her knees to her chest, trying to find the courage to say what had been building in her heart for days. "This land is beautiful," she said softly. "I understand why you love it." "It is," Hayden agreed, "but it is more than just beautiful. It is honest. It does not lie to you or pretend to be something it is not. It can be harsh and unforgiving, but it can also be generous and life-giving. You always know where you stand with the land. Is that what you want in life? Honesty?" Hayden turned his head to look at her, his dark eyes serious. "It is what I want in everything. I have no patience for games or pretense. Life is too short and too uncertain for that." Belinda took a deep breath, her heart pounding. "Then I will be honest with you. I do not want to go to California, not anymore, not if it means leaving here, leaving you." Hayden sat up slowly, his eyes never leaving her face. "Belinda, I know it is foolish," she continued, the words spilling out now that she had started. "I have known you for barely 2 weeks, but I have never felt about anyone the way I feel about you. You saved my life, yes, but it is more than gratitude. When I am with you, I feel like I have come home, like I have found something I did not even know I was looking for, and the thought of never seeing you again makes me feel like I cannot breathe." Hayden reached out and took her hand, his fingers warm and strong around hers. "It is not foolish. I feel the same way. From the moment I saw you standing there in the snow, something in me knew. I have been trying to tell myself it was too fast, too soon, that you needed time to recover and figure out what you wanted. But every day you are here, I fall more in love with you. And the thought of watching you leave, of putting you on a stage to California, it is tearing me apart." "You love me," Belinda whispered, hardly daring to believe it. "I love you," Hayden said firmly. "I love your strength and your courage. I love the way you laugh and the way you concentrate when you are sewing. I love how kind you are to my aunt and how you have made yourself useful around the ranch without being asked. I love everything about you, Belinda Harper, and I want you to stay. Not as a guest, but as my wife, if you will have me." Tears were streaming down Belinda's face, but they were tears of joy. "Yes, yes, I will marry you, Hayden Quinn. I cannot imagine anything I want more." Hayden pulled her into his arms, and then his lips were on hers, kissing her with a passion and tenderness that made the world spin. Belinda kissed him back with all the emotion she had been holding inside, pouring her love and her hope and her dreams into that kiss. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Hayden rested his forehead against hers. "I do not have much to offer you yet," he said. "I am just a ranch foreman with some savings. But I promise you, I will work hard and save everything I can. In a few years we will have our own land, our own ranch. I will build you a house with my own hands if I have to, and I will love you every single day for the rest of my life." "You already have everything I need," Belinda said, framing his face with her hands. "Your love is enough. Everything else we will build together." They stayed in that meadow for another hour, talking about their future, making plans, dreaming dreams. When they finally rode back to the ranch, Belinda's face was glowing with happiness, and Hayden could not stop smiling. Clara took one look at them when they walked into the house and clapped her hands together with delight. "Silas," she called out, "come quick. I think we are going to have a wedding." The wedding took place 4 weeks later, on a warm day in mid-March when the desert was beginning to bloom. It was a small ceremony held at the ranch, with only the ranch hands, a few neighboring families, and the circuit preacher who happened to be passing through the territory. Belinda wore a dress she had made herself from fabric that Clara had taken her to Flagstaff to purchase, a beautiful cream-colored silk with lace at the collar and cuffs. Clara had lent her a veil that had belonged to Silas's mother, and Maria had woven wildflowers into her hair. Hayden wore his best suit, looking handsome and slightly uncomfortable in the formal clothes. But when Belinda walked out of the house on Silas's arm, when Hayden saw her coming toward him, his face transformed with such love and wonder that several of the women in attendance openly wept. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. They exchanged vows under the open sky, with the mountains as their witness and the people who had become their family looking on with joy. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Hayden kissed his bride with such tenderness that Clara had to wipe away tears. The celebration that followed was full of laughter and music and good food. The ranch hands brought out fiddles and guitars, and there was dancing in the yard until well after dark. Belinda danced with her new husband, with Silas, with several of the ranch hands, but always her eyes returned to Hayden, and always he was looking at her with that expression of love and pride that made her heart soar. When the party finally wound down and the guests departed, Clara showed Hayden and Belinda to a room that had been prepared for them, a larger space than the guest room Belinda had been staying in, with a big bed and new curtains that Clara had sewn herself as a wedding gift. She kissed them both on the cheek and then left them alone, closing the door softly behind her. Hayden turned to his wife, his hands gentle as he removed the veil from her hair and set it carefully aside. "You are so beautiful," he said softly. "I am the luckiest man alive." "I am the lucky one," Belinda replied, reaching up to loosen his tie. "You saved my life and then you gave me a reason to live it." They came together slowly, tenderly, learning each other in the soft lamplight. Hayden was patient and gentle, mindful that Belinda was inexperienced, taking his time to ensure her comfort and pleasure. When they finally came together fully, it was with a sense of rightness and completion that went beyond the physical. They were truly one now, bound not just by law but by love and commitment and shared dreams. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the big bed, Belinda's head on Hayden's chest, his arms wrapped securely around her. Through the open window they could hear the night sounds of the ranch, the lowing of cattle, the call of an owl, the whisper of wind through the cottonwoods. "Are you happy?" Hayden asked, his voice a rumble beneath her ear. "Happier than I knew it was possible to be," Belinda replied. "I thought my life was over when that convoy left me behind. I thought I had nothing left, but it turned out to be the beginning of everything I was meant to have." "The winter convoy left you behind at dawn," Hayden said thoughtfully, "and I returned with my horse and said climb on. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had ridden a different direction that day, if I had not been tracking those strays. The thought of you dying alone out there, of never knowing you, it makes my blood run cold." "But you did ride that direction," Belinda said firmly. "You did find me." "I believe it was meant to be. Some things are just fate." "Then I am grateful to fate," Hayden said, kissing the top of her head, "and I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret saying yes to me." "I could never regret it," Belinda promised. "You are everything I never knew I needed. My protector, my partner, my love." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, two souls who had found each other against all odds, who had been given a second chance and seized it with both hands. The years that followed were full and rich. Belinda set up a dressmaking business in the small room off the main house that Clara insisted she take as a workroom. Word of her skills spread quickly through the territory, and soon she had more work than she could handle. Women came from as far away as Flagstaff and Prescott to have dresses made by the talented seamstress at the Rocking Q Ranch. Hayden continued to work as foreman, but he and Belinda saved every penny they could, building toward their dream of their own land. They were in no hurry, content to build their life together, to learn and grow as a married couple. 2 years after their wedding, in the spring of 1885, Belinda discovered she was pregnant. The news filled them both with joy and a touch of fear. Childbirth was dangerous, especially out in the territory far from doctors and hospitals. But Clara, who had birthed 3 children of her own, promised to be there to help, and they found a midwife in Flagstaff who agreed to come when Belinda's time drew near. Their son was born in November of that year, arriving 3 weeks early in the middle of the night during a thunderstorm that rattled the windows of the ranch house. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Hayden, pacing outside the room, feared he would lose both his wife and his child. But Belinda was strong, and Clara and the midwife were skilled, and when he finally heard the lusty cry of his newborn son, Hayden wept with relief and joy. They named him Samuel Cyrus Quinn, after Belinda's father and Hayden's. Sam was a healthy, happy baby with his mother's gray eyes and his father's dark hair. Hayden proved to be a devoted father, sitting up with Belinda during night feedings, changing diapers without complaint, spending every spare moment holding his son and marveling at the tiny miracle they had created. When Sam was 6 months old, Silas called Hayden into his office one evening and made him an offer that changed everything. Silas was getting older, he said, and he and Clara had been talking about their future. Their own children had settled in other states and had no interest in ranching. Silas wanted to ensure that the Rocking Q stayed in the family, stayed with someone who loved the land and understood what it meant to work it. He offered to sell Hayden half the ranch at a price well below market value, to be paid off over 10 years with no interest. When Silas died, the rest would go to Hayden as his inheritance. It would mean that Hayden and Belinda and their growing family would have a secure future, a home and a livelihood that could be passed down to their children. Hayden was overwhelmed by the offer, hardly able to speak. When he told Belinda later that night, they both cried, holding each other and their sleeping son, grateful beyond words for the generosity and love of the family that had taken them in. They built their own house on the ranch 2 years later, a solid structure of adobe and timber that Hayden largely built himself with help from the ranch hands. It had 4 bedrooms, a big kitchen, and a front porch that looked out over the valley. Belinda set up her sewing room in one of the bedrooms, and they moved in during the summer of 1888, finally having a home that was truly their own. Their daughter was born in 1889, a beautiful baby girl with blonde hair and blue eyes that they named Grace Clara, after Clara Quinn, who had become like a mother to Belinda. Sam was a proud big brother, insisting on helping with everything and constantly wanting to hold his baby sister. Life was not always easy. There were hard winters and dry summers, cattle disease and market crashes, injuries and illnesses. Silas passed away in 1891, leaving the entire ranch to Hayden as he had promised, and they mourned him deeply. But Clara lived on, a vital part of their lives and a beloved grandmother to Sam and Grace. A second son arrived in 1892, William Henry, called Will, who proved to have his father's quiet strength and his mother's artistic eye. Another daughter, Rose Margaret, was born in 1895, completing their family. The house that had seemed so large when they first built it now rang with the laughter and noise of 4 children. And Belinda and Hayden often looked at each other across the dinner table with expressions of wonder and gratitude for the life they had built. Belinda continued her dressmaking, though she took fewer commissions as the children grew, preferring to spend her time with them. She taught Grace to sew, and was delighted when her daughter showed real talent for the craft. Hayden taught Sam and Will everything he knew about ranching, about respecting the land and the animals, about the importance of hard work and integrity. As the years passed and the children grew, Hayden and Belinda's love for each other only deepened. They still took walks together in the evenings when the work was done and the children were in bed. They still talked for hours about everything and nothing. And they never forgot the story of how they found each other, how a twist of fate and a winter storm had brought them together. They told their children the story many times, how the winter convoy had left Mama behind at dawn, how Papa had returned with his horse and said, "Climb on." How a rescue had turned into the greatest love story either of them could have imagined. The children never tired of hearing it, and as they grew older, they came to understand what a miracle it was that their parents had found each other at all. Sam grew up to take over most of the day-to-day running of the ranch, proving to be as skilled and dedicated as his father. He married a schoolteacher from Flagstaff in 1910, and they gave Hayden and Belinda their first grandchildren. Grace married a lawyer from Phoenix, but she continued to work as a dressmaker, eventually opening a successful shop that bore her mother's name. Will became a veterinarian, one of the first in the territory, and stayed on the ranch to care for the animals. Rose, the baby of the family, shocked everyone by going to college and becoming a teacher, traveling to small towns throughout Arizona to educate children who would otherwise have no access to schooling. Hayden and Belinda watched their children build their own lives with pride and joy. They had given their children something precious: a stable, loving home, a strong sense of family, and the example of what true love and partnership looked like. Clara lived to be 85, passing away peacefully in 1903 with Belinda holding her hand. She had been a mother to Belinda in every way that mattered, and her loss was deeply felt by the entire family. They buried her next to Silas on a hill overlooking the ranch, where the view stretched for miles and the wind whispered through the grass. As Hayden and Belinda grew older, as their hair turned gray and their hands became marked by the years, they began to spend more time together, leaving the running of the ranch to Sam and Will. They would sit on the porch of their house in the evenings, holding hands and watching the sun set over the mountains, counting their blessings. "You ever wonder what would have happened if you had gone to California?" Hayden asked one evening in the summer of 1915 when they were both in their 50s. Belinda thought about it for a moment, then shook her head. "No, I never wonder about that. Everything I was looking for I found right here. A home, a family, a purpose, and a love that has sustained me through everything life has thrown at us. California could never have given me that. You gave me that." "We gave it to each other," Hayden corrected gently. "You saved me just as much as I saved you that day." Before you, I was just going through the motions of living. You gave me a reason to dream bigger, to work harder, to become the man I wanted to be. You are my heart, Belinda. You always have been." She leaned her head on his shoulder, watching as the sky turned gold and orange and purple. "The winter convoy left me behind at dawn," she said softly. "And you returned with your horse and said, 'Climb on.' Best decision I ever made, climbing on that horse with you. Best decision I ever made, stopping to help a woman in trouble," Hayden replied, "though it was not really a decision. I could not have ridden past you any more than I could have stopped breathing. It was meant to be." "Fate," Belinda agreed. "Wonderful, terrible, beautiful fate." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky. Around them, the ranch settled into its evening rhythms. They could hear Sam and his wife putting their children to bed in the house down the hill. The cattle were lowing softly in the distance. Somewhere an owl called out and another answered. It was the life they had built together, brick by brick, year by year, with love and hard work and unwavering commitment to each other. It was not a perfect life. They had faced hardships and sorrows, losses and disappointments. But it was a good life, a full life, a life rich with meaning and purpose. As they grew older still, into their 60s and then their 70s, they remained devoted to each other. Hayden's hair went completely white, and his hands became gnarled with arthritis, but he still rose early every morning and insisted on doing what work he could. Belinda's eyes grew weaker, making it harder to sew, but she still made quilts for each new grandchild and great-grandchild, each one a masterpiece of color and design. They celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary in 1935, surrounded by their 4 children, their dozen grandchildren, and their first great-grandchildren. The celebration was held at the ranch, with people coming from all over Arizona to honor the couple who had become legendary in the territory for their love story and their generosity. Sam gave a speech at the celebration, talking about how his parents had taught him what it meant to love truly and deeply, to work hard and never give up, to build something lasting and pass it on to the next generation. Grace spoke about her mother's strength and creativity, about how Belinda had shown her that a woman could be both a devoted wife and mother and a successful businesswoman. Will and Rose added their own tributes, their voices thick with emotion. When it was Hayden's turn to speak, he stood with Belinda beside him, their hands clasped together, both of them a little stooped with age but still strong, still present, still deeply in love. He looked out at the assembled crowd, at the family they had created, at the ranch that had been their home for more than 50 years, and his voice was steady when he spoke. 50 years ago, I married this woman, and it was the smartest thing I ever did in my life. Belinda, you have been my partner, my best friend, my greatest adventure. You have given me 4 incredible children and a life beyond anything I ever dreamed possible. When I found you in the snow all those years ago, I thought I was just helping someone in need. I did not know I was finding my soulmate, my other half, the person who would make me complete. Thank you for saying yes. Thank you for staying. Thank you for loving me. You are my everything." There was not a dry eye in the crowd when he finished. Belinda stood on her toes to kiss him, and the gathered family and friends erupted in applause and cheers. That night, after all the guests had gone home and the ranch had settled into silence, Hayden and Belinda lay in their bed, the same bed they had shared for nearly 50 years, and held each other close. "You remember that first night in the line shack?" Belinda asked softly. "How scared I was, how cold, how certain I was going to die." "I remember," Hayden said. "I remember thinking that I had to save you, that I could not let the world lose someone like you. I did not know yet that you would save me right back." "We saved each other," Belinda said, echoing words they had said many times over the years. "And we built a life together that was worth saving." "The best life," Hayden agreed. "I would not change a single moment of it." They fell asleep in each other's arms. Two souls who had found each other against impossible odds, who had built a love that spanned decades and touched generations, who had proven that sometimes the worst moments of our lives can lead to the very best. Hayden Quinn passed away peacefully in his sleep in the spring of 1938, at the age of 81. Belinda was beside him, as she had been for more than 50 years. His heart simply gave out, the doctor said, worn out after a long and full life. The entire territory mourned him, and his funeral was attended by hundreds of people whose lives he had touched. Belinda lived for another 3 years, but everyone said that part of her had gone with Hayden. She spent her days surrounded by her children and grandchildren, telling stories about their father and grandfather, keeping his memory alive. She still sat on the porch in the evenings, but now she sat alone, looking out over the ranch that they had built together, remembering. She passed away on a cold morning in January of 1941 at the age of 80. Her last words, spoken to Grace, who was holding her hand, were about Hayden. "Tell him I am coming," she whispered. "Tell him to wait for me." They buried her next to Hayden on the hill beside Clara and Sela's, where the view stretched forever and the wind whispered through the grass. The entire family gathered for the funeral, 4 generations standing together to say goodbye to the matriarch who had given them all so much. Sam, now an old man himself, stood at his mother's grave and told the story one more time, the story that had become family legend, the story of how the winter convoy left her behind at dawn, and a cowboy returned with his horse and said, "Climb on." He told it so that his grandchildren and great-grandchildren would know where they came from, would understand the love and courage that had founded their family. "Our mother could have died that day," Sam said, his voice carrying across the gathered crowd. "The cold and the fever could have taken her, and none of us would exist. But fate intervened in the form of our father, a cowboy who could not ride past someone in need. He saved her life, and in doing so, he gave life to all of us." They loved each other deeply and completely for more than 50 years, and they built something lasting, something that will continue long after we are all gone. This ranch, this family, it is all a testament to their love, and we should never forget that. The Rocking Q Ranch continued to thrive under Sam's management, and eventually under his sons. The house that Hayden built still stood strong, though it was expanded and modernized over the years. Belinda's sewing room was preserved as a sort of shrine, her needles and thread and fabrics left exactly as she had arranged them, a reminder of the woman who had built a business and a reputation through her skill and determination. The story of Hayden and Belinda became a cherished part of Arizona history, told and retold, a reminder of the strength and resilience of the pioneers who had settled the West. But more than that, it became a love story for the ages, proof that sometimes the worst days of our lives can lead us exactly where we need to be, that fate has a plan even when we cannot see it, and that true love, when you find it, is worth holding onto with everything you have. The winter convoy that left Belinda Harper behind on that cold January morning in 1883 had no idea what they had done. They could not have known that their carelessness would lead to one of the greatest love stories the Arizona Territory would ever know. They could not have foreseen the family that would spring from that one act of abandonment, or the legacy that would endure for generations. But Hayden Quinn, riding his paint horse Dakota through the snow, tracking lost cattle, had known the moment he saw Belinda standing alone in that abandoned campsite. He had known that his life was about to change, that the woman shivering in the cold was going to become his everything. And when he rode up to her and offered his hand, when he said those simple words that would echo through history, "Climb on," he was offering more than just rescue. He was offering a future, a home, a love that would last beyond his lifetime. And Belinda, weak with fever and fear, had trusted him. She had climbed on that horse, wrapped herself in his arms, and let him carry her to safety. In doing so, she had found not just salvation from the storm, but the other half of her soul, the man who would love her and cherish her and build a life with her that neither could have imagined alone. Their story lived on long after they were gone, told around dinner tables and campfires, written down in family histories and local newspapers. It became the kind of story that gives people hope, that reminds them that love can bloom in the most unexpected places, that sometimes the path we think we are supposed to take is not the right one at all, and that fate has a way of putting us exactly where we need to be. The winter convoy left her behind at dawn. A cowboy returned with his horse and said, "Climb on." And from that simple beginning came a love that changed everything, a family that would thrive for generations, and a legacy that proved that sometimes the greatest adventures begin with the worst disasters, and the greatest loves come from the most unexpected places. It was a story of survival and second chances, of courage and commitment, of two souls finding each other in the vastness of the Arizona wilderness, and choosing to build something beautiful together. It was, in every sense, a love story for the ages, one that would never be forgotten as long as the rocking Q Ranch stood, and the Quinn family remembered where they came from, and the extraordinary love that had made it all possible.